Hello, everyone. I'm Butch Bakani from the UN Environment Program. Welcome to probably the most mystifying session of Climate Finance Week, Ireland, because in today's session, we're going to demystify what is net zero insurance. And that is our topic today. And we want to understand the implications of net zero for the Irish insurance industry. I'm here today joined by Anna Sweeney, Executive Director for Insurance at the Bank of England, and also Chair of the UN convened Sustainable Insurance Forum. Welcome, Anna.
Good morning, Butch. Thanks for the invitation.
Hello, Anna. So we're doing this together with the UN convened Sustainable Insurance Forum, and this is one of the hats that you're wearing. Um, But would it be good for folks to understand what is this Sustainable Insurance Forum or SIF all about, and how does this relate to the net zero agenda?
Great, thanks for the opportunity. It's always great to be able to advertise the work of the SIF and encourage more engagement with a range of stakeholders. So the SIF, as you say, is a UN convened platform for insurance supervisors and regulators from around the world to address sustainability issues. It gives our members avenues for collaborating with peers and sharing knowledge and best practice and developing their own resource back home in each jurisdiction. The Central Bank of Ireland is an important member of the SIF and has very actively contributed to the sharing of best practice materials among members and supported the development of both our internal and external materials. Um, Regulators and supervisors have an important role to play in net zero. We're here to support an orderly financial system, and that includes responding to all sorts of financial risks, of which climate risk is clearly a very important and a rapidly increasing one. In doing that, climate risk is clearly not a local issue; it's a global one. So international collaboration is really key. Climate change requires global solutions, and the SIF is a great forum to ensure consistency in approach from regulators, as well as building knowledge and capacity to deal with that. Now, we obviously recognise that regulators are not the only people having this discussion, and we want to work well with industry, with governments, and with academia and a range of stakeholders. And it's important that we both learn from and challenge each other in this really important fight.
Thank you, Anna. Let's talk about mandates, Anna. And I mean, obviously, each jurisdiction for insurance has its own mandate on insurance. But if I summarize it in a nutshell, like a common thread, it's largely policyholder protection and contributing to global financial stability. And if you are an insurance regulator in a developing country, I guess it's also market development on insurance. Can you share with us your thinking, Anna, on when you think about decarbonization and the net zero agenda, do regulators need to have their mandates updated?
I think the answer is not necessarily. So we here in the UK have had our mandate updated in a letter sent by the UK Treasury to the Bank of England, explaining the kinds of issues that it is looking for it to focus on. So there has been a form of a mandate update. Um, but there are lots of jurisdictions who are doing really great work in this area who haven't, and that's because I think that the financial risks. I think a few years ago the question was a little bit vaguer. The answer was a little bit vaguer, and people took more persuading that this was a big risk to financial services. I think the sort of debate about how is it a risk has largely been done and has largely been won. So people are doing work on this within their existing mandates because the risks to financial stability as a broad remit, but also individual firms, and therefore the through look into policyholders is clearer. Regulators have already assisted in building awareness and education of climate risks as financial risks, and awareness of the transition in the economy that's underway. And the commitments, the transitional risks that will arise from the commitments of the Paris Agreement, which will be required to get to the net zero point on emissions. This is where I think the core concept of risk management is relevant. Supervisors and regulators are tasked with ensuring that the companies that they regulate are able to manage all the risks that they face. And that's no matter where it's from, whether that's for traditional credit risk, traditional underwriting risk, traditional investment risk, or from the newer source of climate change and that transition that we just talked about. Pursuing such sustainability and climate objectives is, I think, completely compatible, as I've said, with that kind of financial stability or more micro supervisory objectives, and indeed many regulators, as I mentioned at the beginning, are already doing so.
Thank you so much, Anna. So in a way, what you're saying is that because there's now really clarity and certainty about climate change being a financial risk to the insurance industry, there's less debate on that. So that, in a way, is by addressing climate change and as a financial risk, it helps regulators fulfill their mandate, for example, on contributing to financial stability. So the answer, perhaps, on not necessarily is like if it's updated, like in your case, it's actually well and good. But if it's not updated, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't address it, right?
Exactly.
All right. Okay. It's good that I got that correctly. So, Anna, let's shift to your other hat as Executive Director for Insurance at the Bank of England. Do you want to share with us what's the thinking at the Bank of England, and particularly in your role as Executive Director for Insurance, on how you're supporting the transition to net zero?
Yeah, so as I said, the bank has recently had its sort of remit updated to reflect the government's priority of achieving strong and sustainable and balanced growth that includes environmental sustainability and consistent with the transition to net zero economy. This includes structural reform to level up opportunity in all parts of the UK, and to transition to an environmentally sustainable and resilient net zero economy, including through regulation. An ambitious programme of investment in skills, infrastructure, and innovation. Should I talk a little bit about what we're doing to
Oh
implement
yes,
that?
please. The devil is always in the details, Anna. So it's really good to get that. Yeah.
Um, so I should start by saying, particularly in a forum such as this, we're very keen to actively contribute in a range of international fora that includes the CIF, but also in insurance, the IIS, the NGFS, which obviously goes more broadly across financial services, and we're very keen to both push through research that we do either locally or in combination with others, and in advocacy. We're obviously also working closely with the UK government on the climate agenda more broadly, including supporting the UK presidency of the G7 and the upcoming UN COP26 conference, and the development of a roadmap to mandatory climate disclosures across the UK economy, so not just limited to financial services, although for us that's obviously the closest and most important part. We have, over the last few years, published a range of supervisory policy and policy statements setting out our expectations for of how firms should be measuring and managing this risk. So we set out in 2019 expectations for how firms should include climate risk within their own governance and risk management standards, including expectations of having senior management accountable for managing the risk, how firms should think about and use scenario analysis, and of course, disclosure. The expectation, I think, possibly unlike lots of other jurisdictions, we also set a deadline for when we expected firms to have embedded that fully, and that comes into place at the end of this year. And we're currently talking about how we will ensure that that has been properly and fully embedded across the industry. So I think from what we've seen so far, it's fair to say that its implementation has been somewhat patchy, and we're really trying to encourage the firms who have not developed as far as we would expect to do that. This is not a nice to have. This is an integral. These risks are real and they are big, and this needs to be an integral part of the way that firms run themselves. Another important piece of plank of the work is stress testing. So we're doing a stress test across both the larger banks and insurers, where we hope to have the results in the first part of next year. And that's designed not so much as a capital setting exercise, which has been the case in stress tests more traditionally, certainly on the banking side, but as a way of trying to size the risk and also to better drive the risk management, and get firms to assess their own resilience to these risks, and for us then to look at the interdependencies between the sectors. So, for example, if a bank has a large book of mortgages, what happens if the insurers were to stop insuring that because of flood or other climate linked risks, and how do those risks into play? We've also set up a climate financial risk forum as an industry forum, which is jointly convened by the regulators in the UK, so that's the PRA and the FCA, and its aim is to build capacity and to share best practice. And it's through that kind of collaboration with industry that we can understand the rapidly moving developments, help to reduce barriers to managing climate risks, and advance the whole sector's response to the financial risks from climate change. And I guess finally, just to mention that this is not just about us telling the institutions that we regulate what to do. We're also we're working to decarbonise our own operations, and in 2021 we published our second annual climate disclosure report. So that's on our own operations, both the running of the organisation and the bank's balance sheet, following the first one that we published in June 2020. So it's not just do as we say, but it's also do as we do.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I think that final point was very clear of practicing what you preach. And thank you so much for your leadership at the Bank of England and also at the Untitled Stable Issues Forum. A few years ago, conversations like this were very rare, but thanks to the leadership of the Bank of England, yourself, and also the Stable Insurance Forum, I think this has really become a global agenda for insurance regulators. So I know you're very busy, so we'll end it there, and hope to reconnect with you again. Good luck with COP26, which is really a fortnight away.
Thanks very much for your time, Bruce.
Now let's move on to the unpacking further what net zero insurance is. So before we go to the panel, I'm going to be talking to several folks. AXA, we have Cheryl Banks, we have Will Harding from the Unconvened Stable Insurance Forum, and we have also Moya Murdoch, the CEO of Insurance Ireland. I'm just going to do a scene setting presentation about the work of the UN's with the global insurance industry on the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. So let's get on with that. The big picture here is that we are way off track from where we're supposed to be compared to what was agreed in Paris in 2015. Based on the current trajectory, if you add up all the climate action plans of government, we are headed towards a 2.7-degree warming by the end of the century. So we really are off course, and we want to stay at the maximum of 1.5-degree warming. This is why the recent IPCC report on the impacts of climate change, which is so pervasive, was described by the Secretary General as the code red for humanity. And we don't even need to look at the latest IPCC report. In 2018, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, already came up with a report comparing the impacts of a 1.5-degree world and a 2-degree world. And it was super clear already in 2018 that on all counts, be it fisheries, crop yields, extreme heat, or sea level rise, a half degree of warming is a world of a difference. So as I said earlier, the current trajectory is 2.7 degrees. We are off track. We need to cut emissions in half basically by 2030. So this is really the decisive decade of action that can really make or break the 1.5 degree ambition. At the UN last year at the Principles for Stable Insurance, we convened the largest gathering of insurance companies, 22 of them representing around 10% of world premium, understanding how different climate change scenarios can impact the insurance business, be it a 4-degree scenario, a 2-degree scenario, or a well below 2-degree scenario, and ideally 1.5. And we realized that this is something that's really pervasive and prevalent, that's relevant to the insurance industry. Beyond the physical impacts of climate change is also, as we move from a high carbon to a net zero emissions economy, what would be the implications on insurance business, also on premium revenue and market share, for example, as well as litigation risk, particularly for companies that may be writing directors and officers liability insurance. And the more litigation happens there in the real economy, there is potentially a risk and claims related to liability insurance claims, and that is not yet well understood. Um, so we did that last year, and we were very strongly supported by Mark Carney for all of the roles that he's playing, and that also helped us really shape an agenda on what we can start doing in terms of the net zero transition. Because if you look at TCFD originally, that was really a narrative about climate risk management. How can you become resilient in light of climate change? But it doesn't really point you yet very clearly to bending the emissions curve. However, the recent PCFD recommendations actually point to portfolio alignment where financial portfolios, be it investment, lending, or insurance, are being assessed in a way that they could be aligned with the temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. That brings us to the net zero agenda on actually how can we use the influence of the insurance industry to bend the emissions curve by mid-century at the latest so that we can limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And 2 years ago, we already kickstarted this journey. The UN convened Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, convened leading insurance companies as well as pension funds to come together and commit to transition their investment portfolios to net zero emissions. That means going to net zero by 2050 at the latest, and more importantly, setting interim science-based targets every 5 years, just like governments on their national climate action plans. They want to show credibility and accountability by setting science-based targets every 5 years to show their progress in decarbonizing and bringing down the temperature of their investment portfolios that's aligned with a 1.5 degree scenario and net zero transition pathway. And that's already blossoming, and they've already set initial 5 year targets based on that original commitment. So the basic idea now is what about the liability side of the balance sheet of an insurance company? How can you bring that and into alignment with the 1.5 degree target of the Paris Agreement? So here comes the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, which basically tells us what can we do on the underwriting side of the house to bring that to net zero. So this is a commitment to transition underwriting emissions attributable to insurance and reinsurance underwriting portfolios. Obviously, an insurance company has its own carbon footprint, its own building, its own energy, but the biggest footprint is the scope three of emissions of an insurance company, which would be the emissions attributable to its insurance and reinsurance underwriting portfolios, particularly specifically the emissions of its corporate and retail clients. And that's what this is all about. And just like on the Asset Owner Alliance, they have to set science based intermediate targets every 5 years, and they have to report annually and publicly on how they're making progress on this commitment. It also is a commitment to support not only the TCFD, which is already quite prevalent there, as Anna had mentioned, but also emerging frameworks like the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosure. And climate change and nature are interlinked. Nature, as for example, forests as ecosystems are carbon sinks. So the more we protect nature, the more that we can also make sure that we can sequester and store carbon. And also linking to the PSI, making sure that those who join this alliance also sign the PSI. And there's a link here, more importantly, to the asset side of the balance sheet. It encourages an insurance company who is part of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance to make sure that it has cognitive dissonance, but also transitioning its investment portfolio to net zero. So, what is net zero insurance? The initial thinking is we can achieve decarbonization of underwriting portfolios in different ways. You can set underwriting criteria. A bunch of companies out there have already had, for example, a thermal coal exclusion policy. Um, Beyond simply excluding, um, an insurance company can also engage with its corporate and retail clients so that they can have a transition to decarbonization and align with net zero. Just like as an investor on active ownership, you can also engage with your clients on net zero and help them decarbonize. Then there's the upside opportunity also of ensuring all the things that we need to ensure to make net zero happen. This means breakthrough and next generation technologies, that we need to ensure nature based solutions, anything that will reduce carbon or sequester carbon that can take us to net zero, and very specific insurance claims management. How can all the claims there happening, motor claims, property claims, be managed in a more environmentally sustainable way that you contribute to a circular economy and also bring down emissions? And in terms of risk management frameworks of companies, be it your enterprise risk management framework or sustainability risk management framework, can you start integrating net zero criteria into that frameworks and make it part of your company's risk framework? And just like any other sector, the insurance industry can engage with policy makers and regulators, for example, to ensure not only a science-based transition, but also a socially just transition to net zero. So we're doing many things at the Alliance. We have a work on trying to understand what are the metrics for insured emissions, which is quite new. And then how do you then, once you start measuring insured emissions, how do you then set targets that can help you really bring down emissions? We'll also come up with a white paper on unpacking net zero insurance by the time of COP. And we're also have an engagement work stream. We're looking at how life and health insurers as underwriters can be part of this agenda as well, and not simply general and PNC insurers. Um, just to add that we on the work on metrics, we are also a partner with the partnership on carbon accounting financials to basically develop a standard for to measure insured emissions, because we don't want 10 metrics out there where you have this metric for one insurance company and then another metric for XYZ company, and then you end up comparing apples and oranges, which is very hard to do. So we're doing this work. We hope to come up with the output by mid next year, and that will help us then bring to the next challenge of target setting. Another important thing is that anyone can say they have a net zero strategy, but unless you pass the minimum criteria of the UN's Race to Zero campaign, which is the most rigorous criteria there on net zero commitments, be it for business or the financial sector, it's going to be very hard to say that you are the standard. And we have passed that test. This is now the Net Zero Insurance Alliance is basically now the gold standard for net zero insurance commitments because it brings the agenda to science-based targets and low no overshoot scenarios covering all emissions and also transparency and accountability. Um, this alliance, together with all the other net zero initiatives out there, will come together, all come together at the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. There's going to be a big impact in the time for COP26. But the basic idea here for the GFANs that's shared by Mark Carney is how do you then make every professional decision take into account climate change? And this is one very strong response to it by creating a net zero financial ecosystem. Which brings me to the end of the presentation. So, in this is what we believe the insurance industry can do on sustainability as whole, not specifically climate change, but on risk assessment, all the way to insurance solutions and decarbonization and investment portfolios. The insurance industry really has a key role to play as risk managers, insurers, and investments. And we're just talking about net zero today. We're not even talking about adaptation and resilience, which is really also the other side of climate action, which insurers are very active on. So to prepare you for the discussion at hand, I wanted to give you a heads up that we will do a couple of online poll questions. And so please go to menti.com and enter that code 7471938 and make sure that you're ready. And then we're going to pull those questions up later on so that you can also share with us your thinking on the issues that will be discussed. So without further ado, let's go to our panel discussion. And I'm going to start with Sherry Wilbanks from AXA. Sherry is has one of the longest titles I know of. She is, on the one hand, senior net zero project manager at AXA. That's only one role. The other role is head of group risk management for PNC Climate and Sustainability. All right, Sherry. So long and short of it, what's the thinking at AXA on net zero? AXA is chairing the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. So we work a lot with Sherry, and she's woke up very early in New York to be with us today.
Yes, happy to do so, Butch, and well done on the title. So a bit about AXA and net zero. Just to highlight initially, this part of what you talked about in your presentation is that for AXA, it has been a whole effort that looks across the entire business operations. So AXA was one of the founding members for the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, and so when they talk about net zero, they look at it on both the asset side of the balance sheet as well as the liability side of the balance sheet. And so many of the initiatives and different measures that they do internally apply to both of those. So it's not singularly focused on one or the other. AXA's also had a very prominent role around the nature-based and sustainability type of issues as well, recognizing that there is an intersection and a crossover between what's needed for climate as well as for nature. So they do have a very holistic approach in terms of how they look at it.
For that insight. So this agenda on net zero at AXA didn't happen overnight. So there must have been a journey, Sherry, to get to this point because you can't simply wake up one day and say like, oh, we are now chairing the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. What is that? What has been the journey at AXA to get to this stage that you're actually chairing the most ambitious net zero insurance alliance out there?
Yeah, so I think part of that journey was included the initiatives like the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, but part of that journey was born from just looking at the business operations, the insurance operations themselves, and what we were seeing within our portfolios, what we were seeing our clients and our customers undertaking as they were looking at this. So it was a journey that included taking a hard look at the efforts that we were taking on climate. Access had a very strong climate policy and favorable climate initiatives for a number of years, but as you said, not necessarily net zero. And there was a recognition that the sort of different measures that we've talked about that insurers have historically done around resilience and adaptation, while those are not going to go away, we're not going to stop doing those things. There was a recognition that these will no longer be sufficient after a while. If we keep on the trajectory that we're on, those adaptation methods, those resiliency methods, are going to cease to be sufficient. So there was really, some light bulb moments that happened over the last couple of years that caused AXA to really want to take this prominent role.
Thanks, Sherry. And so we'll continue the discussion in a bit. I want to make sure that we get everyone on board into the discussion. So let's go to Will Harding, the head of implementation at the UN Convened Sustainability Insurance Forum, so the SIF that was being chaired by Anna Sweeney. Will, Anna already explained a little bit of the thinking, particularly in the Bank of England. But can you shed a little bit more light on the thinking at the SIF on your thoughts on the net zero agenda specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Butch, and thanks to the team at Sustainable Finance Ireland and the whole team behind Climate Finance Week Ireland. It's a pleasure to be here. So yeah, absolutely. The SIF is, as Anna said, it's a collection of insurance supervisors and regulators. And it may not be the role of the regulators to prescribe targets necessarily to industry on either their underwriting or investment decisions, but there is definitely a strong role for the regulators to, institutionalize this kind of prudent risk management. As Sherry said, at a certain point, there's no point to all these resilience and adaptation efforts if ultimately we are not tracking towards a net zero future. So what can supervisors do? There's actually a great collection of action that we've brought together at the SIF. So the journey of regulators, it's generally started with raising awareness, and Anna touched on that a little bit. But now we're seeing a lot of the SIF members in their own jurisdictions really carve out some clear supervisory expectations, and they might do that through guidance to industry or through updating their regulatory frameworks. And you see through that guidance the importance not only of the risk management and governance aspects that we'd expect to see from the regulators, but also a shift towards a new thinking in strategy. And that kind of new strategy is certainly needed in the new world, and it's needed to address these climate resilience. So you'll also see that through the regulators conducting their own scenario analysis and stress testing. And that, I think, is a key tool that really highlights the efforts needed to scale up climate action and to move away from these kind of risky activities, both on the investment and the underwriting side. So I think when you see the activity from regulators, you'll be able to tell that while it's great to see the industry taking a leadership role, and these groups such as the NZIA and the whole GFANZ organizations, they're extremely pleasing to see. But at the same time, you'll also see that regulators are paying close attention to both these risks and these opportunities. And the direction of travel is pretty clear that these efforts are only going to scale up, both from the industry side and the regulator side.
Regulators are watching and observing, but also looking within on what they're trying to do. Well, can I just get a sense check from you? Because just like what I asked Sherry, I can tell you, I've been following the evolution of the SIP as well. 5 years ago, this was probably not a topic like climate even, as in general, but now it is. And so I could safely say that TCFD is there on most regulators' agenda right now. But net zero probably is not that clear yet. Is that a fair assumption that there's probably no coherent view yet there by the insurance supervisory community on net zero, people are starting to get into that journey yet. But is that a good, fair sense check of where we are on what regulators are trying to make out of this?
Thanks, Butch. Yeah, I think that might be a fair assessment. So we, as you say, 5 years ago, the CIF was started as a small group of supervisors who were the coalition of the willing, who was starting to take notice of climate risks. And the progression on climate risks has been immense, and it's been relatively quickly for supervisory and regulatory progress. And what we see now is that these kind of newer and emerging aspects, so nature-related risks and biodiversity, the importance of the net zero agenda, these are able to kind of take the lessons that we learned in going through the climate risk progression. And so what I hope is that the movement on these new topics is speedier, because it has to be.
Thank you, Will, for those perspectives, and thank you for staying up late in Sydney for this. So this, we're really spanning the globe here, with Sherry on the other end of the spectrum so early in New York, and Will late in the evening in Sydney. And then let's bring it home to Ireland. This is anyway the Climate Finance Week Ireland. And so for this segment, we have Moyag Murdoch, the CEO of Insurance Ireland, which is the voice of the Irish insurance industry. So if I may say, Moyag, here is the voice of the voice. Moyag, Moyag, like, you've heard a lot already from Anna, and then the whole presentation about Net Zero Insurance Alliance, and then access, evolution on this thinking, and then further insights from a supervisory perspective. Share with us your thinking at Insurance Ireland on net zero and the Irish insurance industry. Where are you here in this space, and what's the current thing?
Thank you, Butch, and thank you to your previous speakers. They were all very interesting. And I think you've touched on a few key points there. As you say, Insurance Ireland is the voice of insurance, and we believe Insurance Ireland, we have a key role to play on moving this agenda on for the greater good. And whereas the problem has been known for a long time now, the methodologies and the commitments to act, and in some cases, doing tangible actions haven't always been there. But as you say, since the last 5 years, it has moved on at a rapid pace. And Ireland being an international centre for insurance, we are home to some of the biggest brands. Some are who are on the panel, and I'm delighted to say they have demonstrated their commitment to the alliance. We have some of the biggest balance sheets here in this country, and they can make a difference. As an insurance body, a representative body, we are here to support our members and to support the undertakings of the roadmap that coincidentally we just launched on Monday. And the Sustainable Finance Roadmap will actually enable the industry to take the next steps and move forward on the commitments that have been outlined. I think you made a really important point there when you said to your last speaker, there isn't actually any coherent view in some cases on what net zero actually means to not just the industry or the consumers, but in general, what does that actually mean? So very important that we develop training and skills that we can target the awareness of what this all means for business, for what it means for insurers. And that's really key to the first building block in implementing the roadmap. And that's where Insurance Ireland are really ready to play their part. We ourselves have signed up to the Net Zero Alliance as well at the European level with our colleagues in Insurance Europe. And I'm delighted to say many of the members of Insurance Ireland are committed to doing that as well. So I think that's where we come in here as a coherent voice that will unify the sector and to drive forward this agenda in a meaningful way with meaningful actions. And I'm looking forward to playing my part and the organisation's part in that agenda.
Thank you so much, Mike, for your leadership. And I think you have touched on very interesting points. First, the Irish insurance industry is really quite international and diverse on its own. You mentioned the weight of all of those balance sheets that's really domiciled in Ireland. But that roadmap is the link to the roadmap. I think is very interesting because this national sustainable finance roadmaps are evolving in different countries. But it's sometimes, at least what I've observed, they call it sustainable finance, but it's largely an investment narrative or lending narrative. Can you unpack to us a little bit on how the Irish Sustainable Finance Roadmap really connects with the insurance industry, given your key role there? I think that would be quite interesting for our audience, not only locally, but also internationally, to somewhat see how what you're doing at Insurance Ireland really connects in a very strategic way with a national roadmap.
Sure, but I'd be happy to do that. Well, obviously, the Ireland for Finance and Sustainable Finance Roadmap has 5 key pillars included in that strategy. First being the development of talent, building the knowledge and the capability. And I'm delighted even just very recently, yesterday's budget, the Minister of Finance did announce the 42 million investment into the skills net. And I think that is critical because obviously this is moving at a pace now, the whole climate agenda, and everybody is trying to get the appropriate skilled resources into their organisations so that they can develop their own internal strategies that align to the Ireland's roadmap, as well as at an international and global level. So that's really important that we build that internal capability, that we have that knowledge, not just at entry level, but at senior exec and at board level, that we have training coming through the system that we can build on. Then the next steps are sustainable products and services from the insurance sector that are supporting the whole agenda at bringing down the carbon emissions that we get onto that road of net zero, and that we actually have a meaningful contribution to play. The next pillar is in the industry readiness, developing best in class insights, tools and mechanisms so that what gets measured gets done, that we have the ability to do the proper analysis and insights, that we can report and provide the information to not just the regulators but also to the public, because we have a very discerning consumer here in Ireland and they want to know what their insurance products and services do to support the whole climate agenda. We obviously have the digital technology playing a key role and providing solutions to the whole ESG data and risk management challenge, because obviously we need to work smarter, we need to work faster in getting that analysis and the risk insights into the exposures that insurers are expected to try and cover and mitigate against, and to provide their policyholders and their businesses with the tools to mitigate those risks, and also to move away from the dirty fuels and the dirty industries. So that's another very key point that the roadmap is seeking to address. And then enabling the environment so that we can work with regulators and legislators, that Ireland in itself is an attractive place to invest in, especially in the climate agenda, that we make it easy to do business here that supports the climate agenda, that we work with the regulators, that we prevent barriers to provide the necessary services and products. And then, of course, very important is to promote and communicate the whole awareness of the sustainable finance priorities. That is so important, that we don't just look inwards, that we look to the consumers, to the citizens, to the public, that it's a two-way street, that we are raising the awareness on the agenda, and that it becomes a lot more than just rhetoric, that it actually becomes something you can make conscious decisions on, and that businesses can set out their own key strategies in this area, and that the consumers can make discerning choices and work with their insurers in order to achieve net zero going forward, and as quickly as possible. That's so important, because I think really what we have seen over the last 10 months and the last 6 months is how quickly the environment is changing, and what, as you say, 5 years ago we were talking about trying to achieve, now is it's a real burning platform, and time is of the essence that we deliver on those commitments with tangible outcomes and tangible actions.
Thank you, Moyag. It seems like a very comprehensive approach there in Ireland on how the insurance industry, and also Insurance Ireland in particular, is contributing to an Irish financial ecosystem that is fit for net zero, which is what we're trying to do here. So I'm just checking the time. So we have 12 minutes, but I got a green light from the organizers that I can actually extend for 5 minutes. So why don't we try and pull up our online poll question so we can hear from the audience what they're thinking. And I know there's a 20-second delay from the time we pull up the online poll to the time you see it. But let's pull up the first question and let's see. And let's test what people are thinking. So the first question is, in the context of insurance portfolios, which approach would be the most impactful for the Irish insurance industry to carry out to accelerate the net zero transition? Please go to menti.com and enter the code earlier. And so it's 747-19328. Again, 747-19328. I hope you're ready and be able to vote. So it's only one, choose one, and it's going to be tough. And the options range from underwriting criteria. That means an exclusion policy, for example, on a carbon intensive sector. So we already have a bunch of answers. A lot of people are saying engagement with clients is very important, and potential clients, alongside claims management is also there. Also building it into risk management frameworks, green insurance solutions. That's very interesting. Seems like there's a bit for everyone here. And these are actually approaches that are embedded in the commitment of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. It seems like at the moment the top vote getter is engagement. Second one is setting underwriting criteria, and pretty much equal at the moment is green insurance solutions, ensuring the transition, and also integrating net zero into risk management frameworks. Let's use that to carry on the discussion. So, Sherry, does this surprise you? Does this is this something that we get different responses from different regions around the world? But as I said, the Irish insurance industry is very diverse. They have a lot of international presence, a very strong local presence. But what do you make out of this, Sherry? Does this validate what we're trying to do at the Alliance?
Yeah, it's actually very encouraging, because I think oftentimes when people first think about net zero for insurance, they immediately go to an exclusionary mindset. So what can we not do versus focusing on what we can do? So the responses to this poll show that people here in Ireland are thinking more about what is possible versus the what's not possible. The engagement aspect is very important, and I completely agree with it. I think that there's opportunities and ways to engage not just with corporate clients as well as retail clients, and to take them on that net zero journey with the insurance industry. We obviously know that from a corporate client perspective, that there will be certain sectors that will have net zero initiatives themselves and will have a focus on climate, maybe more than others. But our consumer retail clients should not be neglected in these conversations as well. And I'm proud to actually highlight an initiative out of our AXA Ireland group that involves the retail motor business, where they've got an initiative in place where a consumer can offset their year's worth of carbon emissions for their vehicle by the insurance policy that they have with AXA Ireland, and those offsets are being done within Ireland. So I think that it's fantastic that there's a way to do this, that it supports the consumers in Ireland as well as the economy in Ireland and the total efforts. So I'm proud to see and glad to see that engagement's at the top.
All right. And Moyag, this is really live, a
Yeah.
pulse survey. It's not an academic one, but I guess it's interesting for you to see what folks are saying, right? What do you make out of the poll results?
Yes, I think that's really interesting. And following on just from what Sherry said there, I think it's great the way you can get choice. You can get products there that help you as a consumer support the climate action agenda, but also underpinning that is supports too from government in that they also provide an incentive there to do the right thing. So as a whole ecosystem, it's really important that we do work together, such as getting the incentive there to go green, whether it's on an EV vehicle, or whether it's getting more attractive insurance products that are leading to a much better world. So I think that's very encouraging. But I also see why the engagement option was featuring very highly there, because I think that's where we do need to be heard. We need to be heard from the regulator and also the legislators, so that they listen and say, how can we as an ecosystem work together in order to make it all worthwhile? Because just a little bit over here, as I think I've heard some people say, that there was a very it was a thin on the ground budget. But I think when you add all the elements together, every little bit works to give something more material and meaningful. So you do need to look at the bigger picture here, and insurance is no different. It all dovetails in together when we work together and say, okay, we can all do our bit here, and the outcome is actually what we measure here as success. It's not just the individual parts, but it's the sum of all components working together to deliver on the agenda. And I think that's an important message from that poll.
Right. Thank you, Moyag. And Will, you're watching. Regulators are watching. Is this interesting for you to pick up these data points?
I think it absolutely is, Butch. I mean, when we're talking about the transition to a low emissions economy, we want to see a just transition, right? And so that engagement, I think, is really important. Not only engagement with the regulators and academics, scientists, experts, but also engagement with clients. I think the kind of the knowledge that insurers hold through their understanding of risks, when insurers go out to clients, the message can be extremely persuasive. With this knowledge, the understanding of the risks, being able to convince clients of the need and the speed that's needed to adjust in these transition plans. Also, how to transition in a way that is helpful to the entire economy, that is a just transition, and then ultimately with that underlying idea that without this kind of transition from their customers, insurers won't be able to support these kind of activities in the long term. And so it gives a real motivation, I think, for the insured to move quickly. And it's through that support of the entire economy that insurers can be really powerful.
Right. Thank you so much. Let's go to our back to our net zero quiz, question number 2. I think we have 9 minutes left if I count my extension. So I am really excited to ask this question, because this really goes down deeper. We're talking about how do you attribute carbon emissions to insurance products and solutions. How do you do that after you measure the carbon footprint or intensity of a particular asset or person? And then how do you then start attributing that to lines of insurance business? So the question here is very simple. Which class of insurance business would be the most challenging to measure in terms of insured emissions? Is it life and health insurance? Is it property and casualty insurance, but on commercial lines. So energy infrastructure, manufacturing companies. Is it PNC retail lines, more personal lines like home insurance or motor insurance? Um, so uh, a lot of folks are saying that commercial lines in non-life is number one. There's a good bunch also. A lot of people saying like, how do you do that in a life and health insurance context? How do you start measuring that? So the question here is like not to prioritize which is which. It's really simply what is the most challenging to measure, because the concept of insured emissions is very new compared to finance emissions for lending or investment. And then we're taking it further to net zero. But this is really measuring simply insured emissions. So um, all right. So I think that's a clear result. PNC commercial, and then life and health and retail. I'll just point to Sherry on that. Sherry, what do you make out of that? Does that again, we've have our priorities at the Net Zero Insurance Alliance.
Mm.
Does that somewhat validate or invalidate what we're thinking?
I think it is an interesting result, and partly we might be seeing this result because asking the question about life and health, for example, might be the first time that somebody's thinking about, oh, we're also going to do this for life and health. It may not have been on the radar screen or in the mindset of that we're also going to be looking at doing this within life and health portfolios. Within the PNC commercial side, there are a broad range of products that make up PNC commercial. So I can see where if you're looking at the whole breadth of all of the different insurance products that are available, and we're looking to measure the carbon intensity associated with each and every one of those, it is challenging. So it's not that I disagree with the way the polls results have turned out. I think it does show that just in general across the board that what we've set out to do with PCAF, what the NZIA set out to do with PCAF is a challenge, one that we're up to. But yeah, we look forward to getting more input from everyone in industry like this in terms of what they think the challenges and priorities are.
Thank you, Sherry. So the third and final question will ask as an online poll, and then I'll point that to Will, and then we'll close with a final thought from Moyang. So let's go and pull up that question specifically designed for regulators. Should insurance regulators and supervisors have net zero financial stability mandates? And so yesterday there was a call to action by the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero on that calls for this specifically, not only insurance regulators but financial regulators as well, in general. So it seems like we did touch about this earlier. Many more than half are saying yes. There's almost even um, no and maybe. No one is saying I don't know. Um, it's still moving. I'm just making sure that we stabilize before I move it on to pass it on to Will. But so it seems like yeah, 50% for yes, 25 for no and maybe. Will, what do you think? What do you think about this?
I'm pleased that we have an audience who are sure. Nobody doesn't know. That's a good answer. I mean, it's very interesting. I think that there's obviously scope for some regulators who've already changed their mandate, and that makes it explicit, and it also reflects, I suppose, a commitment of the government who usually set those mandates for the financial regulators. But I would say that the absence of having an explicit mandate shouldn't stop action from industry in those jurisdictions, and it shouldn't stop action from regulators. I mean, as Anna spoke about, we've already seen a lot of supervisory expectations coming down from supervisors, the kind of stress tests and scenario analysis that is broadening out to a longer time horizon to 2050, whereupon we see these kind of scenarios that envisage what a net zero future looks like and the kind of tasks that are required from the industry to get there. and also the disclosure regimes that are being pressed in a lot of jurisdictions and will continue to be in the run up to COP26. I think that we'll see this stronger and stronger supervisory activity here, as well as the industry leadership. That means that I think we'll see it on both sides, that those with express mandates and those without will continue to be able to progress work in this area.
Thank you, Will. And I'll pass it on to Moyag for the final word. Moyag, I think you've seen the online poll results. I can tell you that we at the UN PSI, we're learning as we're going on net zero. You mentioned stuff there earlier about capacity and training. There's a comprehension issue here. This is not easy to simply assimilate latest science and then go decarbonize and go net zero and apply it to insurance portfolios and invest portfolios. So you've seen the results. I wanted to give you the final word on what you're thinking, what you've seen, and some insights as we are 2 weeks away from COP26 on what we can do going forward.
Thanks, Butch. Yes, absolutely. Even the responses to the questions do provide insight into what the challenges are in terms of the skills and the training and education that is needed there. And really, what I'd just like to reiterate, as Insurance Ireland, as the trade body for the insurance sector here in Ireland, we will not be held wanting in doing our bit to try and drive that agenda, that we want to build on our leadership position and promote the capabilities that we have within the sector. It is really important that we get that skills gap addressed, and that we have capacity to grow the business in Ireland and to have an informed and expert sector that are fully aware of all of the challenges within the sustainable finance area. And really, we're here to support both the roadmap on behalf of our members, and also support the Alliance on the road to net zero through further engagement with our stakeholders, with the regulator, with the legislators, so that we can have those policies, that we have the environment, that we can actually create, products and services and deliver on actions that gets us towards that net zero goal. And I'm looking forward to talking to you again in the near future next year to see how much progress we have made in that regard. But it isn't I wouldn't underestimate the challenge ahead of us and what we need to do there in order to deliver on our commitments. But I think you have a willing trade body here and a supportive membership as well of Insurance Ireland to do that.
Thank you so much, Moyag. And I can tell you my aspiration as we close this. I hope that we can have an Irish Net Zero Insurance Day sooner than later after this event. And perhaps we can have a longer discussion with other parts of the Irish insurance industry on this, and really to take it forward on next steps. Net Zero will not end with COP26. It will really be the start of a longer journey on to make this happen. And as always, as with last year, I would like to end with a note of optimism with an Irish proverb. May the wind be always at your back. So thank you, Moyag. Thank you, Will. And thank you, Sherry. And thank you, Anna. And thank you to all of you for being with us today. This will be the first of many conversations, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Butch.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye now.